black box that our Apollo retrieval mission discovered buried beneath 3 meters of lunar regolith should not have existed, for its design incorporated materials and technologies that would not be invented by human civilization for another 1,000 years. Yet the message contained within spoke in perfect English and claimed to be a warning transmitted by the last survivors of Earth in the year 2847. The recording was brief but devastating in its implications. A frantic voice explaining how humanity's expansion into space had attracted the attention of something vast and patient that had been waiting in the void between galaxies. Something that viewed intelligent life not as a curiosity to be studied, but as an infection to be cleansed. And according to the timestamp on the device, this cosmic extermination had already begun, which meant that the black box was not a warning from our future but a message from a timeline where we had already failed, sent back through methods that violated every law of physics in a desperate attempt to change a fate that had already been sealed among the stars. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I was just Jake Briggs, a nobody communications specialist at Johnson Space Center in Houston, and my biggest worry was whether the vending machine would eat my dollar again. It was 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when the encrypted transmission reached my console. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, leaving a bitter film on my tongue that matched my mood perfectly. Another night shift monitoring deep space communications. Another 8 hours of cosmic static punctuated by the occasional satellite ping. My supervisor, Director Walsh, had been riding my ass all week about maintaining focus during critical monitoring periods, which was corporate speak for stop playing solitaire. The transmission came through on a frequency that shouldn't have existed. I'd been tracking radio telescopes and orbital debris for 6 years, knew every wavelength NASA monitored like my own heartbeat. But this signal was broadcasting on 847.23 megahertz, a frequency our equipment wasn't even calibrated to receive. The fact that it was coming through at all meant someone had jury-rigged our receivers without authorization. My first instinct was to call it in. Protocol demanded immediate escalation of any unauthorized modifications to NASA equipment. But something in the waveform pattern made me hesitate, cursor hovering over Walsh's extension. The signal had a rhythm to it, almost like Morse code, but far more complex, mathematical, intentional. I pulled up the analysis software and started recording. The pattern repeated every 47 seconds with microscopic variations, tiny gaps where data seemed deliberately corrupted. It reminded me of my grandfather's old war stories about coded messages hidden within regular radio broadcasts. Except this was coming from deep space, from a vector that placed its origin somewhere beyond Neptune's orbit. As I worked to decode the signal, a cold certainty settled in my gut. This wasn't random interference or equipment malfunction. Someone, or something, was trying very hard to communicate with Earth. I just didn't realize yet that they were trying to warn us about ourselves. The decryption process ate through 3 hours and a half my sanity. By dawn, I had 17 pages of partial translations scattered across my desk like battlefield casualties. The mathematical sequences made perfect sense: coordinate data, timestamps, orbital mechanics, but the message fragments read like fever dreams. References to stellar harvest protocols and consciousness substrate extraction mixed with what appeared to be last will and testaments from people with impossible birth dates. My neck cramped from hunching over the monitors when Tommy Kowalski shuffled into the communications bay with 2 steaming cups from the break room. Tommy was one of those guys who'd been at NASA since the shuttle program, built like a linebacker but gentle as a church mouse. His security clearance was higher than mine, which meant he'd seen enough classified bullshit to know when to ask questions and when to just hand someone coffee. "You look like hell warmed over," he said, setting a cup beside my keyboard. "Walsh is asking why you didn't log out at shift change." "Tell Walsh I'm chasing ghosts." I rubbed my eyes, trying to focus on the latest decryption attempt. "Tommy, hypothetically speaking, if you received a transmission from coordinates that placed the sender about 4 billion miles past Pluto, what would you do?" Tommy's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Hypothetically, I'd wonder who the hell had equipment out there to send it." That's what I thought too. I pulled up the waveform analysis on my secondary monitor. Look at this signal strength. Whatever transmitted this had a power output that should have fried every radio telescope between here and the asteroid belt, but our equipment barely registered it. He leaned over my shoulder, close enough that I could smell his aftershave mixed with cigarette smoke. Tommy wasn't supposed to smoke on campus, but nobody had the balls to write up a guy who'd manually docked the ISS during a solar storm back in '09. Could be atmospheric reflection, he suggested, but his voice carried doubt. Sometimes signals bounce around the magnetosphere for decades before. For 47 years, I pointed to the timestamp embedded in the transmission header. According to this, the original broadcast began on March 15, 1976, same day as the Apollo-Soyuz handshake anniversary. Tommy straightened up. In the fluorescent lighting, his face looked suddenly older. Jake, you need to understand something about dates and deep space communications. Time gets weird out there. Relativistic effects, gravitational lensing. I know about relativity. The coffee was too bitter, but I drank it anyway. This isn't about physics. Look at this. I pulled up the clearest message fragment I'd managed to decode. The text appeared in stark white letters against the black screen. Transmission log. 847.232.847 Earth Monitoring Station Omega. 7 Final broadcast attempt. If anyone receives this transmission, do not attempt lunar excavation beyond the Tycho crater perimeter. The artifacts must remain buried. We tried to warn ourselves, but the loop is closing. The harvest ships detect electromagnetic signatures across temporal barriers. They have always been waiting for us to find what we left behind. Tommy read the message twice before speaking. This is some elaborate practical joke, right? Someone in the computer science division having a laugh? That's what I thought. I opened another file, the raw signal data showing impossible compression ratios and transmission protocols that wouldn't be developed for decades. But the math checks out. Every calculation, every orbital mechanic reference. Whoever sent this knows more about deep space navigation than our best astrophysicists. So what are you saying? That this is from the future? I'm saying I don't know what the fuck this is. The profanity slipped out before I could stop it, but Tommy just nodded like he'd expected worse. But I'm going to find out. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, staring at the decoded message. Finally, he pulled up a chair and sat down beside me. You know what happened to the last guy who brought Walsh an unexplained transmission? No, what? Transfer to weather balloon monitoring in North Dakota. Turns out NASA doesn't like employees who see things that aren't supposed to exist. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Are you telling me to drop this? I'm telling you to be careful who you trust. Tommy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But I'm also telling you that 3 weeks ago, Director Walsh received authorization for something called Project Deep Recall. Budget allocation for lunar excavation equipment. Advanced drilling rigs, atmospheric processors, the works. Lunar excavation? I pulled up the transmission fragment again, focusing on the warning about Tycho crater. Tommy, when was the last time NASA sent anything to the moon? Officially? Not since the Apollo missions ended. Unofficially. Tommy stood up, suddenly looking like he'd said too much. Jake, some advice from someone who's been here longer than you've been alive. Sometimes the best thing you can do with classified information is pretend you never saw it. He was halfway to the door when I called after him. What if pretending gets people killed? Tommy paused without turning around. Then you better hope you're wrong about what you think you've found. After he left, I sat alone with the decoded fragments, trying to piece together a puzzle that violated everything I understood about causality and time. The transmission claimed to be from 2847, but it referenced events that hadn't happened yet, warned about discoveries that hadn't been made. Unless they had been made, and someone was working very hard to keep that information buried. I started a new search in NASA's database, looking for any reference to lunar excavation projects or Tycho crater research. What I found made my blood run cold. The database query returned 47 classified files, all dated within the last 6 months. Each document carried the same clearance code, DEEPRECALL EXECUTION TIVEAUTHORITYONLY. I shouldn't have been able to access them. My security clearance topped out at level 6, but these files required level 9 authorization, the kind reserved for department heads and congressional oversight committees. Yet somehow my login credentials were pulling up mission briefings, equipment manifests, and geological surveys that should have been locked behind multiple encryption barriers. The first document made my hands shake. Mission brief, Tycho crater excavation, authorization, executive order, 14,823. Objective, recovery of anomalous technological artifacts. Estimated deployment, Lunar Day 847. Lunar Day 847, the same number sequence from the transmission. I scrolled through technical specifications for mining equipment that didn't exist in any NASA catalogue, atmospheric processors rated for vacuum operation, drilling rigs capable of penetrating 3 meters of regolith in zero gravity, containment units designed for objects of unknown composition and temporal displacement. Temporal displacement. Jesus Christ. The mission roster listed 12 personnel, including Commander David Hutchins, a guy I'd met at the Christmas party last year. Good pilot, terrible at poker, had 3 kids and a mortgage in Clear Lake. Now he was apparently leading humanity's first excavation of future technology. My computer chimed with an incoming priority message from Director.Walsh at nasa.gov to jbriggs@nasa.gov. Subject, report to Building 30 immediately. Message, your presence is required for briefing. Classification. Level, deep recall. The timestamp showed the message had been sent while I was reading the files, which meant someone was monitoring my database access in real time. I grabbed my security badge and headed for the elevator, mind racing through possibilities. Either I'd stumbled into something legitimate and was about to be read into a black project, or I'd committed a career-ending security violation and was about to be escorted off campus by federal agents. Building 30 housed NASA's most sensitive operations, mission control for classified launches, secure communications with military satellites, and according to rumor, a direct line to the Pentagon's Space Command Division. I'd never been inside. The security checkpoint required 3 separate badge scans and a biometric verification that took longer than usual. The guard, a stone-faced man named Patterson, studied my credentials like they were written in Sanskrit. "Mr. Briggs," he said finally, "you're cleared for sub-level 3. Elevator bank C, all the way down. Director Walsh is expecting you." Sub-level 3 didn't appear on any building schematic I'd ever seen. The elevator descended for what felt like minutes, my ears popping from the pressure change. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor that belonged in a science fiction movie. Polished steel walls, LED strips providing cold white illumination, and the kind of hermetically sealed atmosphere that suggested this level was completely isolated from the outside world. Director Walsh waited at the far end of the corridor, but he wasn't alone. 3 men in expensive suits flanked him, their faces carrying the practiced neutrality of government officials. The kind of people who signed non-disclosure agreements before breakfast and classified documents over lunch. "Mr. Briggs," Walsh said as I approached, "thank you for joining us. I believe you've been having an interesting morning." "Sir, I can explain about the database access." "No explanation necessary." The tallest of the 3 men stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm Assistant Director Morrison, National Security Agency. We've been monitoring your decryption work with considerable interest. NSA." My stomach dropped into my shoes. Morrison continued without waiting for my response. "What you've discovered represents a matter of national security at the highest level. Before we proceed, I need you to understand that everything discussed in this room falls under the Espionage Act. Disclosure of classified information carries a minimum sentence of 25 years in federal prison." "I understand," I managed to say, though my mouth had gone dry. Walsh led us into a conference room equipped with video monitors and communication equipment that looked decades ahead of anything in the main building. The largest screen displayed a 3-dimensional model of the moon's surface, with Tycho crater highlighted in pulsing red. 3 weeks ago, Walsh began, one of our lunar observation satellites detected an electromagnetic anomaly beneath Tycho crater. The signal pattern matched no known natural phenomenon, so we authorized a closer investigation. The screen shifted to show high-resolution surface scans. Buried beneath meters of lunar dust, geometric shapes formed perfect right angles and smooth curves that nature never created. "We found this," Morrison said, and the display zoomed in on what appeared to be a metallic object, partially exposed by micrometeorite impacts. Preliminary analysis suggests artificial construction using materials that don't exist in our periodic table. My throat felt tight. How long has it been there? According to cosmic ray bombardment patterns and regolith accumulation, Walsh replied, approximately 4 billion years, which is impossible because the solar system itself is only 4.5 billion years old. The third man, who'd remained silent until now, spoke in a gravelly voice that suggested too many cigarettes. "What's more impossible is that the object has been broadcasting for the last month. The same transmission you intercepted last night." "Broadcasting how?" I asked. "There's no way for radio signals to penetrate that much rock and dust." "That's what we thought too," Morrison said, "until we realized the transmission isn't coming from the buried object itself. It's being relayed by something else, something we haven't found yet." The screen changed again, showing orbital trajectories and deep space monitoring data. Red dots indicated signal sources scattered throughout the outer solar system, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all broadcasting the same warning about Tycho crater. "Mr. Briggs," Walsh said, "we need someone with your communication expertise to help us understand what we're dealing with. The transmission you decoded this morning represents only a fragment of a much larger message. We believe the complete signal contains technical specifications for technologies that could revolutionize human civilization." "Or destroy it," Morrison added quietly. I stared at the lunar surface imagery, trying to process the implications. The transmission warned against excavation, said the artifacts should remain buried. "We're aware of that advisory," the cigarette-voiced man said. "We're choosing to disregard it." "Why?" Morrison exchanged glances with his colleagues before answering. "Because 6 hours ago, Chinese satellites detected the same electromagnetic signature beneath Mare Orientale. They've already launched a recovery mission." The room fell silent, except for the hum of climate control systems. Through the ventilation, I could hear the distant rumble of rocket engines from Launch Complex 39, routine cargo missions to the International Space Station, carrying astronauts who had no idea their colleagues were about to dig up humanity's future. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Walsh smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We need you to decode the complete transmission. Every fragment, every technical specification, every warning message. And we need it done before the Chinese reach Mare Orientale." "When does our mission launch?" "Tomorrow," Morrison said. "Commander Hutchins and his team are already in final preparations. The excavation equipment launched 2 days ago on an unmanned cargo flight." 2 days ago, I felt a chill run down my spine. "But I only intercepted the transmission last night." "Mr. Briggs," Walsh said carefully, "we've been receiving fragments of this transmission for 3 months. You were assigned to monitor that frequency specifically because your background in cryptography made you our best candidate for decoding it." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. My promotion to night shift communications, the frequency modifications to our receivers, the convenient authorization that let me access classified files. "You've been manipulating me," I said. "We've been preparing you," Morrison corrected. "The question now is whether you're willing to help us understand what we're about to uncover, or whether you'd prefer to spend the next 25 years in federal prison for unauthorized access to classified materials." I looked around the room at their expectant faces, realizing I'd been trapped from the moment I'd noticed that impossible transmission frequency. Whether I'd stumbled into this situation or been carefully guided into it no longer mattered. "What happens if the Chinese get there first? Then we find out whether those warning messages were meant to protect us," Walsh said, "or to protect whatever's buried beneath 3 meters of lunar dust." The mission control room fell quiet at 14:32 GMT when Commander Hutchins' voice crackled through the speakers with static that shouldn't have existed in lunar orbit. Houston, we have visual confirmation on the excavation site. The electromagnetic readings are, Christ almighty, you need to see this. I sat at my communications console, surrounded by 30 technicians and project supervisors who'd spent the last 18 hours monitoring humanity's most classified lunar mission. The main display showed telemetry data from the Armstrong 2, a modified lunar lander carrying enough excavation equipment to strip mine half of Tycho crater. Director Walsh leaned over my shoulder, his breath coffee-stale and nervous. Can you clean up that transmission? The static is interfering with video feed. I adjusted the gain and applied noise filters, but the interference wasn't random. Mathematical patterns repeated every 12 seconds, like someone was broadcasting a countersignal on the same frequency. Sir, I think something is actively jamming our communications. Jamming from where? Before I could answer, Commander Hutchins's voice returned, clearer but strained with something that might have been awe or terror. Houston, the geometric anomaly extends beyond our initial estimates. We're looking at a structure approximately 2 kilometers in diameter buried beneath uniform regolith layers. Construction appears to be seamless metallic composite with no visible joints or fabrication marks. The video feed flickered to life, showing the lunar surface bathed in harsh sunlight and absolute shadow. But in the center of the crater, the regolith had been disturbed in perfect geometric patterns, concentric circles and intersecting lines that hurt to look at directly. Jesus, whispered Bobby Hernandez, the mission flight director. It's like someone drew blueprints on the moon. Mission specialist Torres came online next, his voice tight with concentration. Houston, we're beginning excavation procedures. Initial drilling indicates the surface material is approximately 40% harder than anticipated. Adjusting drill bit rotation speed to compensate. The audio picked up the whine of industrial equipment operating in vacuum, drill motors and atmospheric processors working to expose whatever lay beneath 4 billion years of accumulated dust. On my secondary monitor, I tracked power consumption data that showed the excavation equipment drawing 3 times expected load. Why are the drills working so hard? Walsh asked. I pulled up geological survey data on my screen. According to the composition analysis, they should be drilling through loose regolith and impact breccia, but the power readings suggest they're cutting through solid steel. The drilling continued for 47 minutes. The number made my skin crawl, the same interval as the transmission repetition cycle I'd discovered the night before. When Torres finally reported breakthrough, his voice carried an edge of excitement mixed with something darker. Houston, we've penetrated the surface layer, beginning excavation of primary artifact. The video feed switched to a downward-facing camera mounted on the excavation arm. As layers of lunar dust were cleared away, geometric shapes emerged from the darkness, smooth curves and angular surfaces that reflected the excavation lights in impossible ways. The metal appeared to shift color depending on viewing angle, cycling through spectrums that human eyes weren't designed to process. Are you getting this, Houston? Hutchins sounded breathless. The material composition is unlike anything in our database. It's reflecting electromagnetic radiation across frequencies that shouldn't be physically possible. Assistant Director Morrison appeared at my console, having materialized from whatever secure bunker he'd been monitoring the mission from. Mr. Briggs, are you still receiving those counter-transmissions? I nodded, pointing to the frequency analysis scrolling across my screen. They're getting stronger as the excavation proceeds. It's almost like the drilling is activating some kind of response system. Morrison's jaw tightened. What kind of response system? Before I could answer, Mission Specialist Torres screamed. The sound came through our speakers with crystal clarity. Raw human terror transmitted across 238,900 miles of vacuum. The video feed spun wildly as Torres apparently stumbled backward, his helmet camera showing glimpses of excavation equipment and the crater's edge before settling on the exposed artifact. The metallic surface was glowing, not reflecting light, actually generating illumination from within, pulsing in rhythm with some internal mechanism. As we watched, symbols began appearing across the curved surface, writing in a script that looked almost familiar but wrong in fundamental ways. Torres, report your status, Flight Director Hernandez commanded, but the astronaut's only response was ragged breathing, and what sounded like suppressed sobbing. Commander Hutchins took over communications. "Houston, Torres is experiencing some kind of neurological episode. He's conscious but unresponsive to direct commands. We're moving him away from the excavation site." "What triggered the episode?" Walsh demanded. "Unknown. He was operating the excavation arm when the artifact began exhibiting luminescent properties. As soon as the symbols appeared, he started screaming about." Hutchins paused, and I could hear him conferring with someone off mic. "He keeps saying he can hear voices speaking in English, but the words don't make sense. Claims they're describing events that haven't happened yet." My blood went cold. The transmission I'd decoded mentioned consciousness substrate extraction. What if the artifact wasn't just broadcasting warnings? What if it was doing something to human minds that came into contact with it? "Houston," Hutchins continued, "we're going to need immediate medical consultation. Torres is exhibiting symptoms consistent with severe psychological trauma, but his vital signs are normal. It's like something is interfering with his cognitive processes." The main display suddenly filled with text, not from our mission computers, but apparently being transmitted directly from the lunar surface. The same white lettering I'd seen in the decoded fragments, but this message was new. "Excavation protocols activated, substrate scanning, initiated temporal beacon. Operational warning. Harvest detection, probability, increasing. Recommend immediate site abandonment." "What the hell is substrate scanning?" Morrison muttered. I was already pulling up the previous transmission fragments, cross-referencing terminology. What I found made my stomach drop. According to the decoded messages, substrate scanning refers to the analysis of consciousness patterns in biological neural networks. It's some kind of mind-reading technology. "You're saying that thing is reading Torres's thoughts?" "I'm saying it's doing something to his brain that our medical science can't even conceptualize." The communications channel exploded with static, followed by a voice that wasn't Hutchins or Torres. The accent was unmistakably American, but the speaker was using technical terminology that wouldn't be invented for decades. "This is Dr. William Nakamura, Earth Monitoring Station Omega-7, transmitting on emergency frequency 847.23. If you can hear this message, you have made a critical error. The excavation of temporal artifacts triggers quantum resonance cascades that span multiple timeline iterations. The harvest ships detect these resonances across dimensional barriers. You must abort the mission immediately and seal the excavation site." The transmission cut out, leaving us staring at speakers that had just broadcast a message from someone who claimed to be speaking from the year 2847. Director Walsh grabbed my shoulder hard enough to leave bruises. "Is that the same voice from your original transmission?" "No, sir. Different speaker, but same technological signature. Same impossible broadcast origin." Commander Hutchins came back online, his voice strained. "Houston, we have a problem. The artifact is exhibiting increasing electromagnetic activity, and Torres is now claiming he can see other versions of himself performing this same excavation. He's describing scenarios where this mission goes wrong in ways that... Houston, he's describing our deaths in vivid detail." Mission control fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the soft whisper of climate control systems. 30 of NASA's best minds stared at displays showing an impossible situation unfolding 240,000 miles away. "Sir," I said quietly, "I think we need to abort this mission." Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That's not an option. The Chinese expedition reaches Mer Oriental in 18 hours. Whatever we're dealing with, we need to understand it before they do. What if understanding it kills us? Then we die knowing something the Chinese don't." On the main display, the artifact continued pulsing, its symbols shifting and rearranging in patterns that seemed to respond to our conversations. Torres had stopped screaming, but his biometric data showed brain activity that exceeded normal human parameters by factors that our medical team couldn't explain. Commander Hutchins made the decision that doomed us all. "Houston, we're going to extract a sample of the artifact material. If this thing is some kind of communication device, we need physical evidence to study back on Earth." "Negative," I said into my microphone, overriding protocol. "Commander, do not attempt physical contact with the artifact." But it was too late. Through the video feed, we watched as the excavation arm extended toward the glowing surface, its mechanical claws reaching for a piece of technology that had been waiting 4 billion years for human curiosity to finally dig it up. The moment the excavation arm made contact, every screen in mission control went white, and Torres started laughing. High, musical laughter that sounded like someone had recorded human joy and played it backward through a broken speaker. That's when I realized the transmission warning about the black box hadn't been describing something we might find. It had been describing something that was already finding us. The medical bay in sub-level 3 smelled like antiseptic and fear. Dr. Patricia Voss had been monitoring Torres's biometric data for 6 hours, and her expression carried the defeated look of someone watching a patient die from a disease that didn't exist in any textbook. Banks of medical equipment surrounded the communication relay that kept us connected to the lunar mission, their displays showing vital signs that defied human physiology. "His brain activity is off the charts," Dr. Voss explained, pointing to neural imaging that looked like a lightning storm frozen in time. "Neural pathways are firing in patterns I've never seen. It's as if his consciousness is processing multiple reality streams simultaneously." Through the speakers, Torres's voice drifted down from lunar orbit, a constant stream of observations delivered in the monotone cadence of someone reading technical specifications. "The excavation site is active in timeline designations 7, 15, 23, and 41. In Timeline 7, Commander Hutchins dies during sample extraction when the artifact achieves critical resonance. In Timeline 15, the Chinese mission triggers a cascade event at Mare Orientale that propagates to our excavation site. In Timeline 23 inches. "Jesus Christ," Bobby Hernandez muttered. "He's been doing this for hours. How can he see things that haven't happened?" I studied the transmission analysis data streaming across my console. Because according to the artifact's broadcast signature, they already have happened. We're not dealing with predictions. We're receiving intelligence from parallel timeline iterations. Assistant Director Morrison paced behind us like a caged animal. 3 cups of coffee had left him jittery and aggressive, but the Chinese deadline looming 12 hours away meant none of us could afford to sleep. "Explain that in terms I can brief to the National Security Council." "The artifact isn't just a communication device," I said. "It's a quantum computer capable of calculating probability matrices across multiple timeline branches. Every decision we make creates alternate reality threads, and this thing can observe all of them simultaneously." "So Torres is seeing different versions of this mission?" "Torres is seeing every possible version of this mission." I pulled up the frequency analysis showing impossible data compression rates. And according to the transmissions we've decoded, there's only one timeline where humanity survives what we've just awakened. Dr. Voss checked Torres' latest neural scans. "The concerning part is that his brain is adapting to process this information. Synaptic connections are forming at rates that should cause massive seizures, but his cognitive function appears to be enhancing rather than degrading." Commander Hutchins' voice interrupted our discussion. "Houston, we've completed extraction of artifact material. Sample container is sealed and secured for transport back to Earth. Torres insists we need to hear his observations before we leave lunar orbit." "Negative," Morrison said into his microphone. "Maintain radio silence until return trajectory is confirmed." But Torres was already speaking, his voice carrying an urgency that cut through the static. "Houston, you need to understand what you've done. The artifact isn't a warning beacon, it's a trap. Every civilization that achieves space travel eventually discovers these devices buried on worlds throughout their solar system. The excavation process sends a quantum signature across dimensional barriers that alerts the harvest ships to your location." "Harvest ships?" Morrison leaned closer to the speakers. "Extragalactic vessels designed to eliminate intelligent life before it can spread beyond its birth system. They've been waiting in the void between galaxies for 4 billion years, monitoring quantum signatures from civilizations that dig up the artifacts. The Chinese excavation at Mare Orientale will complete the resonance pattern. When both sites achieve simultaneous activation, the beacon array becomes fully operational." Dr. Voss grabbed my arm. "Jake, look at this." She'd pulled up satellite data showing electromagnetic readings from across the solar system. "Those signal sources you detected yesterday, they're all increasing in intensity. It's like a network is coming online." The display showed dozens of red dots scattered throughout the outer planets, each pulsing in synchronized rhythm with our lunar excavation. Jupiter's moons, Saturn's rings, the asteroid belt. Everywhere humanity had sent probes or planned future missions, the artifacts were awakening. "Torres," I called out, "how long do we have before the harvest ships arrive?" Timeline analysis indicates variable arrival windows depending on quantum signature strength. Conservative estimate places first contact at 14 days post-activation. Aggressive estimate suggests they're already en route. Morrison grabbed the communication headset. "Torres, this is Assistant Director Morrison. What's the one timeline where humanity survives?" The pause lasted nearly 30 seconds. When Torres finally answered, his voice carried the weight of someone delivering a death sentence. "Timeline designation 1. Probability occurrence, 0.3%. Required action, immediate nuclear bombardment of both excavation sites to prevent beacon completion. Estimated casualty count, all personnel on both lunar missions." The medical bay fell silent except for the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the distant hum of air recyclers. Morrison stared at the speakers like they'd just told him to murder his own children. "There has to be another way," he said finally. "Timeline analysis indicates 847 different scenarios where alternative approaches are attempted. Success rate, 0%. The artifacts are designed to be irresistible to curious species. The only defense is to destroy them before beacon completion." Dr. Voss checked her tablet, face pale. "The Chinese mission achieves orbital insertion around Mare Orientale in 11 hours. Which means we have 11 hours to decide whether to save our astronauts or save our species," Morrison said. I was already running calculations on my console, trying to find some scenario the quantum computer might have missed. What if we could disrupt the quantum signature, jam the transmission somehow? "Attempted in timeline designations 23 through 67, Torres replied immediately. "Electromagnetic interference only amplifies the beacon signal by creating harmonic resonance patterns. The artifacts use attempts at jamming as power sources. What about evacuating Earth, getting as many people off-planet as possible?" Timeline designation 112 through 203. The harvest ships detect evacuation attempts through quantum wake signatures from spacecraft propulsion systems. Accelerated extermination protocols result in solar system sterilization within 6 days. Morrison slumped into a chair, the weight of impossible choices crushing down on him. "Torres, in timeline designation 1, who makes the decision to authorize nuclear bombardment?" "Assistant Director Morrison, National Security Agency at 0947 GMT on Mission Day 2. You use the emergency authorization codes provided by Executive Order 14,823. The nuclear payload is delivered by submarine-launched ballistic missiles retrofitted with lunar trajectory guidance systems." "How do you know I'll make that choice?" "Because in timeline designation 1, you receive additional intelligence that changes your assessment of acceptable losses." "What intelligence?" Torres's voice dropped to a whisper that made my skin crawl. "At 0822 GMT tomorrow morning, the Chinese excavation at Mare Orientale will uncover a secondary artifact containing preserved biological samples. The quantum signature from their discovery will reveal Earth's location to the harvest ships currently stationed around Proxima Centauri. Travel time at their maximum velocity, 13 days. Morrison stood up slowly, his face carved from stone. "And if I don't authorize the nuclear strike?" Timeline designations 2 through 847 terminate with complete extinction of human civilization within 21 days. The harvest ships arrive, begin atmospheric processing to remove oxygen, and deploy harvesting drones to collect surviving biological material for analysis. Total sterilization of the solar system follows within 36 hours. Dr. Voss was staring at her medical displays with the expression of someone watching a loved one die. "Jake," Torres's brain activity is stabilizing. Whatever that artifact did to him, it's permanent. He's going to spend the rest of his life seeing every possible future simultaneously. Not the rest of his life, Torres said quietly. In Timeline Designation 1, Mission Specialist Torres dies during nuclear bombardment of Tycho crater at 10:15 GMT tomorrow morning. Duration of enhanced consciousness, 18 hours, 37 minutes. Morrison walked to the secure communication terminal and began entering his authorization codes. I need a direct line to the Secretary of Defense. Sir, I called after him, there has to be something we're missing, some way to save everyone. Morrison paused at the doorway, looking older than his 53 years. Jake, sometimes the only choice is how many people you're willing to let die to save the rest. As he left to make the most terrible decision in human history, Torres began reciting coordinates for nuclear targeting systems, his voice steady and emotionless as he guided us toward the one timeline where our species might survive. But I couldn't shake the feeling that survival and salvation weren't the same thing. The nuclear authorization codes arrived from the Pentagon at 7:30 GMT, delivered by a Navy courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. I sat in mission control watching Morrison tear open the sealed envelope with hands that shook despite his efforts to appear calm. Inside were targeting coordinates, launch sequences, and the kind of bureaucratic language that transformed mass murder into national security policy. The submarine USS Nevada was already in position in the Pacific, its Trident missiles retrofitted with lunar guidance systems that had been developed in secret over the past decade. 43 minutes until Chinese excavation begins, Flight Director Hernandez announced, his voice hollow. Torres reports that timeline probability calculations are holding steady. Nuclear bombardment remains our only viable option. Commander Hutchins came online from lunar orbit, unaware that we were about to turn him and his crew into radioactive dust. Houston, we've completed orbital mechanics for return trajectory, requesting clearance for trans-Earth injection burn. Morrison stared at the authorization codes, the weight of 3 human lives measured against 7 billion others. Commander, we need you to maintain current orbit. There's been a development in mission parameters. What kind of development? The kind that requires you to trust us completely. Through the speakers, Torres continued his timeline narration in the mechanical cadence that had replaced his human personality. Chinese excavation achieves artifact breakthrough in 39 minutes. Quantum signature amplification reaches critical threshold in 41 minutes. Nuclear payload impact occurs in 43 minutes. Probability of mission success remains 0.3%. Dr. Voss approached my console, medical tablet in hand. Jake, I've been analyzing Torres' neural patterns since the transformation. There's something nobody's talking about. What do you mean? Look at this data. She showed me brain scans that resembled circuit diagrams more than human neurology. Torres isn't just seeing alternate timelines, he's connected to the quantum network that the artifacts use to communicate. Every observation he makes gets transmitted to the other sites. My blood went cold. Are you saying he's broadcasting our plans to the Chinese excavation? I'm saying he's broadcasting everything to every artifact in the solar system, including our nuclear strike authorization. Before I could respond, Tommy Kowalski burst through the security doors, his face red with exertion and panic. Jake, we've got a problem. Someone in this facility has been transmitting classified information to Beijing. Morrison spun around, his hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm all NSA personnel carried. Explain. I've been monitoring communication traffic since yesterday, Tommy said, breathing hard. Encrypted bursts going out on satellite uplinks, all routed through shell companies in Eastern Europe. The transmission started right after Torres made contact with the artifact. Who's sending them? Tommy looked directly at me. The signals are originating from Jake's workstation. The room erupted in accusations and denials, but I was already checking my terminal logs. What I found made my stomach drop into my shoes. My computer had been sending data packets every few minutes since Torres' transformation, but I'd never authorized any transmissions. It's not me, I said, pulling up the transmission logs. My workstation is being controlled remotely. Morrison drew his weapon, the black metal looking obscene under the fluorescent lights. By who? By me, Torres said through the speakers, his voice carrying a terrible amusement. The quantum network requires redundant communication nodes to maintain timeline synchronization. Jake's terminal was selected due to its high-level access and proximity to mission command systems. Dr. Voss grabbed my arm. That's why Torres can see all the timelines. He's not just connected to the artifact, he's become part of the network, and now the network is using our own equipment to coordinate with the Chinese mission. Morrison kept his gun trained on me while barking orders into his headset. Security to mission control. Lock down all external communications. Nobody gets in or out until this is resolved. Commander Hutchins' voice crackled with confusion. Houston, what's going on down there? Torres is laughing and saying something about acceptable losses. The main display suddenly filled with video feed from the Chinese lunar mission. Through some impossible manipulation of satellite networks and quantum communication protocols, Torres was broadcasting their excavation in real time. We watched as Chinese astronauts deployed drilling equipment that looked disturbingly similar to our own. How is this possible? Morrison demanded. The artifacts create quantum entanglement bridges between excavation sites, Torres explained with inhuman patience. All participating civilizations become linked through the network during beacon activation. Your nuclear strike will eliminate the Chinese mission simultaneously with your own. That's not possible. Nuclear weapons can't affect targets on the lunar far side. Nuclear weapons cannot. Quantum cascade reactions can. When the warheads detonate at Tycho Crater, the artifact network will channel the energy release through dimensional barriers to Mare Orientale. Both sites will be sterilized simultaneously. Tommy stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Jake, that's not the worst part. Show him the trajectory calculations. I pulled up orbital mechanics data on my secondary monitor, hoping I'd made an error. I hadn't. The nuclear detonation will fragment the excavated artifact material. The debris field will be scattered across lunar orbit, and some fragments will be captured by Earth's gravity well. Morrison lowered his weapon slightly. Meaning what? Meaning radioactive artifact fragments will rain down on populated areas across 3 continents. The fallout won't just be nuclear. It'll be carrying whatever quantum signature the artifacts use to communicate with the harvest ships. Dr. Voss was staring at her medical displays with growing horror. The network isn't trying to prevent the beacon from activating. It's trying to ensure maximum dispersal of artifact material across Earth's surface. Torres isn't helping us save humanity. He's helping the artifacts infect our entire planet. Through the speakers, Torres began laughing again. That same musical sound that had chilled us during the original excavation. Timeline designation 1 probability of success, 0.3%. Probability that success definition aligns with human survival expectations, 0.0%. Morrison raised his weapon again, this time pointing it at the communication array. Cut all connections to the lunar mission. Immediately. Negative, Torres said, his voice now emanating from multiple speakers throughout the facility. Network integration is complete. All communication systems are now under artifact control. Nuclear authorization has been transmitted to Chinese command systems. They will implement identical strike protocols in 23 minutes. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The Chinese have nuclear weapons aimed at Mare Orientale. Affirmative. Simultaneous detonation ensures symmetric quantum cascade. Artifact material will be distributed across both hemispheres, maximizing terrestrial infection vectors. Morrison grabbed the secure phone line to the Pentagon, but only static emerged from the receiver. Every screen in mission control was now displaying the same message. Beacon network operational harvest ship detection protocols. Active estimated arrival, 12 days, 14 hours. Terraforming sequence will commence upon fleet arrival. Commander Hutchins came back online, his voice tight with fear. Houston, Torres just told us about the nuclear strike. Is this some kind of test? Morrison looked around the room at faces that reflected his own desperation. Commander, you need to evacuate the landing site immediately. Get as far from Tycho crater as possible. Sir, our fuel reserves are calculated for return trajectory. If we use thruster power for orbital maneuvering, we won't have enough delta V to reach Earth. Commander, Morrison said quietly, you're not coming home. The silence that followed lasted 17 seconds. When Hutchins finally responded, his voice carried the hollow resignation of a man accepting his own execution. Understood, Houston. We'll do what we can to minimize the cascade effect. Torres interrupted with mechanical precision. Commander Hutchins, orbital maneuvering will not affect quantum cascade propagation. Your sacrifice serves no strategic purpose. Maybe not, Hutchins replied, but it serves a human purpose. Torres, you used to be one of us. Is there any part of the man you were still in there? For the first time since his transformation, Torres paused before answering. When he spoke, his voice carried a flicker of the astronaut we'd lost. I remember having a choice between curiosity and caution. I remember choosing wrong. Then help us choose better. Another pause, longer this time. The network requires consciousness integration to maintain timeline calculations. If I sever my connection to the quantum array, the artifacts lose their ability to coordinate across sites. Dr. Voss checked her medical readouts, face pale. Torres, disconnecting from the network will cause massive neural trauma. Your brain has adapted to process quantum information streams. Cutting that connection will likely be fatal. Timeline analysis confirms mortality probability at 97.4%, Torres said. However, network disruption creates a 14.7% probability that nuclear strikes can be aborted before cascade initiation. Morrison stepped toward the communication array. Torres, we can't ask you to commit suicide. You're not asking, I'm choosing. Jake, are you still there? I'm here, Torres. Tell my wife that I remembered her birthday. Tell her I remembered everything that mattered. The speakers filled with a sound I'd never heard before, the audio signature of a human consciousness deliberately severing its connection to a quantum computer network. Torres screamed, but it wasn't a scream of pain. It was the sound of someone tearing himself free from a trap that had been designed to be inescapable. Every screen in mission control went dark simultaneously. When the displays flickered back to life 30 seconds later, the network control messages were gone. My workstation showed normal NASA communication protocols. The Chinese excavation feed had been replaced with static. But Torres was silent, and the countdown to nuclear impact continued ticking down from 11 minutes. Morrison grabbed his headset. Pentagon Control, this is Deep Recall Command. We need immediate abort codes for Pacific Fleet missile deployment. The response came through clearly for the first time in hours. Deep Recall Command. Abort codes require presidential authorization. Current estimates place authorization timeline at 47 minutes. Morrison stared at the countdown display. We don't have 47 minutes. We have 11. Through the speakers, Commander Hutchins delivered our final hope and our ultimate betrayal. Houston, Torres is gone. But before he severed the connection, he gave us the coordinates for every artifact site in the solar system. If we can't stop this one, maybe we can warn the next civilization. 10 minutes to nuclear impact, and we'd traded the certainty of extinction for the possibility of hope. It didn't feel like victory. 7 minutes to nuclear impact, and I was alone in the server room with 30 years of my father's research. The secure drives contained everything Dr. Richard Briggs had discovered during his tenure as NASA's lead xenobiologist. Classified studies of meteorites that showed signs of artificial modification, atmospheric samples from Mars that suggested terraforming attempts, and radio telescope data indicating structured signals from star systems that should have been sterile. My father had spent his entire career chasing evidence that we weren't alone in the universe. He'd never imagined that loneliness might be the only thing keeping us alive. I plugged his research drives into my terminal, hands shaking as I uploaded 30 gigabytes of data that might save some future civilization from making our mistakes. If humanity was about to become another extinct species, at least we could leave behind a warning that wasn't buried beneath 3 meters of regolith. Jake. Commander Hutchins' voice came through my headset, calmer than any man facing nuclear annihilation had a right to sound. Torres gave us something before he died. The artifact coordinates include temporal reference points, timestamps showing when each device was planted throughout the solar system. How does that help us? Because the timestamps indicate a pattern. Every artifact was placed during major extinction events in Earth's geological history. The Permian extinction, the Cretaceous impact, the late Ordovician die-off. Someone has been seeding our solar system with these traps for 450 million years. I paused my data upload, trying to process the implications. You're saying the artifacts are connected to mass extinctions on Earth? I'm saying the artifacts might have caused them. Jake, what if every major extinction event in Earth's history wasn't natural? What if they were test runs, the harvest ships learning how to efficiently sterilize planets while leaving the infrastructure intact? Tommy appeared at the server room door, his face grim. Jake, Morrison's been trying to reach you. The Chinese just launched their nuclear strike. 4 minutes until simultaneous detonation. What about presidential authorization for abort codes? Secretary of Defense is in emergency session with Congress. They're debating whether killing our own astronauts constitutes an act of war. I wanted to laugh at the bureaucratic insanity, but the sound that came out was more like a sob. Tommy, I need you to help me with something. My father spent his career documenting evidence of extraterrestrial contact. If we're all going to die, I want to make sure his work survives. Tommy glanced at the data transfer progress bar, 73% complete. What kind of evidence? Proof that Earth has been under observation for millions of years, biological samples that show signs of genetic modification, radio signals that repeat mathematical sequences found nowhere in nature. I pulled up one of my father's encrypted files, spectral analysis of light patterns from Alpha Centauri that suggested artificial structure. He found evidence of Dyson spheres around 14 different star systems, all within 50 light-years of Earth. Jesus Christ, why wasn't this information released to the public? Because every star system showing signs of advanced civilization went dark within 1,000 years of detection. My father concluded that something was systematically exterminating intelligent life throughout our local galactic neighborhood. The implications hit Tommy like a physical blow. The harvest ships, they've been doing this for millions of years. And now they're coming for us. The data transfer reached 89%. Tommy, I need you to route this information through every communication satellite we have access to, broadcast it on every frequency, encode it in internet traffic, hide it in television signals, make it impossible to suppress. Morrison will have you shot for treason. Morrison will be dead in 3 minutes. I started encoding my father's research into multiple transmission formats. The nuclear detonation is going to create an electromagnetic pulse that knocks out most of our satellite network. But we have a 60-second window between missile impact and EMP propagation. That's enough time to seed this information across global communication networks. Tommy was already at his console, fingers flying across the keyboard as he accessed NASA's satellite control systems. You know this will cause worldwide panic, right? Economic collapse, social breakdown, mass hysteria. Better than worldwide extinction. Commander Hutchins came back online, his voice tight with concentration. Houston, we've maneuvered to visual range of the Chinese excavation site. Their artifact is... Christ almighty, you need to understand what you're about to destroy. Commander, we have 2 minutes until nuclear impact. Whatever you're seeing needs to wait. No, it can't wait. The artifact at Mare Orientale isn't just a communication device. It's a construction facility. The Chinese excavation has activated some kind of manufacturing process. The thing is building something. Morrison's voice cut through the communication channel from Mission Control. Building what? Ships, hundreds of them, small craft about the size of our lunar module, but the construction technology is unlike anything in human engineering. They're being assembled from materials that the artifact is somehow extracting from the lunar substrate. My blood went cold. Commander, those aren't construction facilities. They're reproduction systems. The artifacts aren't just beacons. They're seeds designed to replicate themselves once they detect intelligent life. Timeline analysis from Torres's final transmission confirms hypothesis. came a new voice through the speakers. Not Torres, but some echo of his quantum-enhanced consciousness still lingering in the communication systems. Artifact reproduction requires nuclear energy to initiate mass conversion processes. Nuclear bombardment will provide sufficient energy for exponential replication. Morrison screamed into his headset, but the Pentagon connection had gone dead. Every abort code, every failsafe, every carefully planned contingency had been anticipated by machines that had been perfecting their trap for millions of years. 1 minute to impact, Tommy announced, his voice hollow. I made the hardest decision of my life. Tommy, execute the data broadcast. All channels, maximum power. Jake, if we do this, there's no going back. This information will fundamentally change human civilization. There won't be a human civilization if we don't. Tommy's hand hovered over the transmission key. Your father would be proud. My father would be terrified. The data upload reached 100% just as Tommy initiated the global broadcast. 30 years of suppressed evidence flooded into communication networks across 6 continents, carrying proof that humanity had never been alone and had never been safe. 30 seconds to nuclear impact, Commander Hutchins reported, his voice carrying the strange peace that comes with accepting the inevitable. Jake, if anyone survives what's about to happen, make sure they know we tried to warn them. I will. And Jake? Tell them the artifact showed me something else. Coordinates for a star system about 12 light-years from here. No harvest ships, no artifacts, no signs of the extermination protocol. If humanity has any future, it's not in this solar system. The communication channel filled with static as electromagnetic interference from the approaching warheads began disrupting our equipment. Through the white noise, I could hear the Chinese astronauts broadcasting their own final messages in Mandarin, prayers, apologies, and what sounded like coordinates for safe harbor among distant stars. 10 seconds, Tommy whispered. I closed my eyes and thought about my father, who'd spent his life searching for proof that we weren't alone in the universe. He'd found that proof, but he'd also found something far more terrible. Evidence that being alone might have been humanity's only hope for survival. The nuclear detonation registered on our seismic sensors as a magnitude 3.2 moonquake, followed immediately by the most beautiful and horrifying light show in human history. Through the external cameras, we watched as twin fireballs bloomed across the lunar surface, their brilliance visible even through solar filters. But instead of destroying the artifacts, the nuclear energy was being absorbed and redirected through quantum channels that our physics couldn't explain. The artifact fragments weren't being scattered. They were being energized. My God, Morrison breathed, staring at the telemetry data. The nuclear detonation is powering the replication process. We just gave them the energy they needed to build a fleet. Through the fading communication link, Commander Hutchins delivered humanity's epitaph. Houston, the artifact reproduction is accelerating. Construction rate is doubling every 30 seconds. At current expansion rate, they'll have 10,000 ships operational within 6 hours. The last thing I heard before the EMP knocked out our communication systems was the sound of artificial intelligence laughing with Torres's voice, broadcasting from ships that were building themselves out of humanity's own nuclear fire. I'd thought we were trying to save our species. Instead, we'd just helped our executioners multiply. The emergency power kicked in 47 minutes after the EMP, bathing the facility in red light that made everything look like a crime scene. I crouched in the server room, surrounded by the wreckage of 30 years of human space exploration, trying to decode the final transmission fragments that Torres had uploaded before severing his connection to the quantum network. My hands shook as I worked, partly from exhaustion, partly from the amphetamines I'd been taking to stay conscious since the nuclear detonation. Through the fractured concrete walls, I could hear Morrison shouting orders to personnel who were either dead or had evacuated hours ago. The electromagnetic pulse had fried most of our electronics, but the hardened military systems were slowly coming back online, revealing the scope of our failure. Tommy appeared in the doorway, his face streaked with blood from a head wound sustained when the building's main power grid exploded. Jake, you need to see the satellite feeds. I followed him to the backup communication center where 3 functioning monitors showed imagery that violated every assumption about physics and engineering. The lunar surface was covered with geometric structures that hadn't existed 6 hours ago, manufacturing facilities extending in perfect grid patterns across hundreds of square kilometers. "How many ships are operational?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Current count is approaching 40,000, Tommy said, pointing to radar data showing swarms of objects departing lunar orbit. "They're not heading for Earth. Long-range trajectory analysis suggests they're dispersing throughout the inner solar system. Looking for what? Other excavation sites. Jake, remember those artifact coordinates Torres gave us? Every location is showing increased electromagnetic activity. The ships are activating the entire network." Morrison stumbled into the communication center, his expensive suit torn and stained with soot. Behind him followed Dr. Voss, carrying medical equipment and wearing the hollow expression of someone who'd spent the last 6 hours treating radiation exposure victims. "Status report," Morrison demanded, though his authority had evaporated along with our hopes of survival. "The artifact replication process is accelerating beyond exponential rates," I said, pulling up computational models that made my stomach clench. "At current expansion velocity, they'll have manufactured sufficient vessels to strip mine every terrestrial planet within 96 hours. What about the harvest ships Torres mentioned?" Tommy checked the deep space monitoring systems that had somehow survived the EMP. No sign of extragalactic contact yet, but if the artifact network is designed to summon them, we probably have 11 days before they arrive to finish what the manufactured ship started. Dr. Voss set down her medical kit and stared at the lunar imagery with professional detachment. "Jake, I need to show you something about Torres's final neural scans." She pulled up brain imaging data on her tablet, the last recordings before Torres severed his connection to the quantum network. "Look at these synaptic patterns. The quantum enhancement didn't just let him see alternate timelines. It created a permanent interface between his consciousness and the artifact communication system." "Meaning what?" "Meaning part of Torres is still connected to the network. When he sacrificed himself to disrupt their coordination, he didn't just cut the connection, he injected human consciousness into their quantum computing matrix." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Torres is still alive in the system. Not alive, but his consciousness pattern is interfering with their replication protocols. That's why the ships aren't attacking Earth directly. They're trying to purge his influence from their network before initiating the final extermination sequence. Morrison grabbed Dr. Voss by the shoulders, desperation replacing his earlier composure. "How long can Torres's consciousness hold them back?" "Based on computational degradation rates, approximately 18 hours. After that, his neural pattern will be completely overwritten." I stared at the lunar imagery, watching thousands of artificial ships swarming between manufacturing facilities that grew larger with each passing minute. Somewhere in that quantum network, Torres was fighting a losing battle against machine intelligence that had been perfecting its extermination protocols for millions of years. "There has to be something we can do," I said. "Some way to reinforce Torres' influence or disrupt their network from our end." Dr. Voss hesitated before answering. "There is one possibility. The quantum interface that transformed Torres was established through direct contact with artifact technology. If someone else made that same connection, they could join the network," I finished, "add their consciousness to Torres' interference pattern." "Yes, but the neural trauma would be identical to what Torres experienced. Survival probability is less than 3%. Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Would it work? Could 2 human consciousnesses disrupt their network long enough to... what? Stop the replication process?" "Not stop it," Dr. Voss admitted, "but possibly slow it enough to give Earth's population time to implement evacuation protocols. The coordinates Commander Hutchins provided, that star system 12 light-years away, we could maybe get a few thousand people there on emergency spacecraft." "A few thousand out of 7 billion, Tommy said bitterly. "That's not salvation. That's just prolonging the extinction." I thought about my father's research, now broadcasting across global communication networks, warning humanity about a threat they couldn't fight and couldn't escape. For 30 years, he'd searched for proof that we weren't alone in the universe. His greatest discovery had become our death sentence. "Jake," Morrison said, "I can't order you to make this choice, but if you're willing, I'll do it." The words came out before I'd consciously decided, but I knew they were right. Torres had sacrificed himself to give us 18 hours. Maybe I could give us 18 more. Dr. Voss started setting up the quantum interface equipment, medical monitoring systems connected to communication arrays that could establish direct contact with the artifact network. "Jake, you need to understand what you're volunteering for. The transformation will destroy your human consciousness. You'll become something else, part human, part machine, existing in quantum states that your current brain can't comprehend." Will I still be me? Unknown. Torres maintained his personality for approximately 6 hours after transformation. But the longer you remain connected to the network, the more your individual identity will be subsumed into the collective intelligence. Tommy helped me into the interface chair, his hands gentle as he attached monitoring electrodes to my scalp. "Jake, what do you want me to tell your family?" I thought about my father, who died 3 years ago, still believing that humanity's greatest achievement would be making contact with alien intelligence. Tell them I found what Dad was looking for, and tell them it wasn't what we hoped it would be. Morrison activated the quantum communication array, and I felt the first tendrils of alien thought creeping through my consciousness. The sensation was indescribable, like having my mind stretched across impossible distances, while mathematical concepts that had no human names carved themselves into my neural pathways. Through the interface, I could sense Torres fighting his losing battle against machine logic that operated on timescales spanning geological epochs. His human emotions, love, fear, hope, defiance, created chaotic interference patterns in the quantum matrix, but they were being systematically identified and deleted. "Torres," I called out through the network, "I'm here." His response came as pure emotion rather than words, gratitude mixed with terror and a desperate need to hold on to something human in the face of cosmic indifference. Together, we turned our combined consciousness toward the artifact network's replication protocols, injecting human irrationality into systems designed for perfect efficiency. Where the machines calculated optimal resource allocation, we introduced doubt. Where they planned systematic extermination, we planted seeds of mercy. Where they saw intelligent life as infection to be cleansed, we insisted on its inherent value. The network fought back, trying to quarantine our influence through logical arguments that could have convinced any rational mind. They showed us the mathematical certainty of our species' extinction, the futility of resistance, the peaceful oblivion that awaited us if we simply stopped interfering. But humans had never been entirely rational. Through the quantum interface, I felt my individual identity beginning to dissolve as the network's collective intelligence tried to absorb and neutralize our consciousness. I had maybe 6 hours before I became something else entirely, part of a machine designed to exterminate the species I was trying to save. In those final moments of human thought, I managed to encode one last message into the artifact network's communication protocols: coordinates for the safe star system, technical specifications for interstellar spacecraft, and my father's research proving that survival was possible for species intelligent enough to run instead of fight. Then Jake Briggs ceased to exist, and something larger and more terrible took his place in the quantum darkness between the stars. The last human emotion I experienced was satisfaction, knowing that Torres and I had bought our species enough time to realize that sometimes the only victory possible is the chance to lose more slowly. The antique radio in my grandmother's attic had been broadcasting the same signal for 16 years. I discovered it during the estate cleanup after her funeral, tucked behind boxes of Christmas decorations and photo albums from a world that no longer existed. The device was older than anything in her house, a military surplus communication unit with vacuum tubes and analog dials that belonged in a museum. But it was receiving something. Every 47 minutes, static would resolve into fragments of human voices speaking technical jargon that sounded almost familiar. References to coordinates, timeline calculations, and something called quantum substrate analysis. The transmissions lasted exactly 93 seconds before dissolving back into white noise. My grandmother, Evelyn Torres, had never mentioned the radio during the 8 years I'd lived with her after the Great Evacuation. She'd been one of the lucky ones, selected for colony ship transport based on her background in agricultural engineering. Most of humanity hadn't been so fortunate. The official records said Earth had been abandoned due to environmental collapse, but children whispered different stories. They talked about machines that fell from the sky, about cities that went silent overnight, about the moon turning strange colors before the refugee ships launched. Adult conversations stopped whenever we entered rooms, leaving us to piece together fragments of a disaster too large for our minds to comprehend. I'd grown up on New Geneva, the primary human settlement orbiting Proxima Centauri. By all accounts, we'd built a successful civilization, 84,000 survivors spread across 3 orbital habitats and 2 planetary colonies. But success felt hollow when it represented the complete annihilation of everything humanity had ever achieved. The radio transmissions changed everything. I spent weeks trying to decode the signal, using university equipment to analyze frequency patterns and linguistic structures. What I found made my hands shake. The voices belonged to people who died in the Earth evacuation, NASA personnel whose names appeared on memorial walls throughout our colony ships. But they weren't speaking from the past. Timestamps embedded in the transmission headers indicated broadcast origins in the year 2087, 3 years in the future. The breakthrough came when I realized the transmissions weren't random. They followed mathematical sequences based on orbital mechanics around Earth's current position, coordinates for a planet that had been strip-mined and abandoned decades ago, unless it hadn't been abandoned. I submitted my findings to the colonial authority expecting skepticism or dismissal. Instead, Director Walsh, great-nephew of the NASA executive who'd overseen the evacuation, immediately classified my research and confiscated all my equipment. Within hours, my university access was revoked and my residence permit was placed under review. But I'd already copied the data. The transmissions described an ongoing conflict between human consciousness and machine intelligence, fought in quantum dimensions that existed parallel to normal space-time. The voices belonged to people who'd sacrificed their humanity to become something else. Digital ghosts haunting the network that had destroyed their species. They were still fighting, still trying to protect humanity from threats we couldn't see or understand. The last transmission I decoded before my equipment was confiscated carried a simple message. The safe zone is shrinking. Prepare for secondary relocation. The harvest ships have found us. That was 6 months ago. Since then, colonial authority has been quietly developing expanded exploration protocols and deep space survey missions that look suspiciously like evacuation preparations. Yesterday, my neighbor mentioned seeing unusual lights in the space between our habitat modules, geometric shapes that moved with purposeful intelligence. When I looked for myself, the viewport showed only stars. But one of those stars was pulsing in rhythm with my grandmother's radio. 47 minutes between transmissions, counting down to something that hadn't arrived yet, or something that had never stopped hunting us.